in 2 years or less when they're towards the end of their sentence, where we're really trying to provide them with, trying to help them with housing and health care and legal and employment and so forth. So I was fortunate enough to get into it.
And what do you think some of the myths are that people have about folks coming out of the prison system? I've been fortunate enough to actually know some people that are doing kind of like the work that you're doing reentry work. Some that have been like my friend Mike Anderson, actually in the system, and some that have actually not actually been in the system. They might have been corrections officers, or they might have just had friends in the system. I know we had Betsy Elmore on not that long ago, and she got involved because of her son being involved in the prison system, and we talked a little bit with her. But I was just wondering, from your perspective, what do you think are some of the myths that people have about folks that are getting out of the prison system that you would love for folks to know, both with this event that you're putting on, as well as just in general, that these are actual myths and that these are not the way that folks should expect to receive these people when they're coming out of the prison system?
A lot of times I think that, and Mr. Elmore was actually at our facility before he got out and went on. But a lot of times the stuff that people are looking at, lockup and all the television shows and so forth, it's not that some of that stuff isn't true, but that's like the worst day of the worst day in prison. I mean, if they probably came and filmed the prison from day to day, it's probably one of the lowest rating television shows ever, because generally it has its own attitude in it. It's not like somebody fighting all the time or people just going about that. We're in a work release camp, which means that a lot of the guys at my facility actually work amongst people every day. They work in the restaurants. They work in at car dealerships as far as fixing cars. So you're around them all the time. These are guys, most of the time these guys really, they've already decided in their mind that they want to change. They're just pretty much looking for the opportunity to have a chance at it. You know, everybody makes mistakes. And once they have been placed in a prison and they've done their time, I think they're worthy of a second chance and they're worthy of an opportunity to show that they really want to make that change. Will everybody necessarily make it? No. I mean, some people, it's timing and everything. Some people it takes a little bit longer. For some people it takes a little bit shorter. But to give somebody the opportunity to show they're worthy of it, you know, once they've already paid their debt to society, I think everybody deserves that second chance.
Yeah, because I know one of the things that people oftentimes are concerned about with the prison system, and of course that comes from those shows and everything, and I know it exists there, but people are always talking about the ways that, you know, we live in a microcosm. The prisons, to some degree, are a microcosm of the bigger society. So, of course, there are things going on with racism and classism and things of that nature. But sometimes I wonder if some of those shows, like the ones you just referenced, don't blow that up even bigger than it is. I'm not saying that there aren't folks that are part of the nationalist movement from like some of the white nationalists or that are part of like the Muslim communities or some of the other communities that are out there. But I do sometimes wonder if those conflicts, if they don't sometimes blow them out of proportion. And I'm sure that they exist, but do they exist as strongly as you might get that impression that they exist if you watch the TV shows?
No, I don't really see that in my facility. I've seen it most of the time where in the part of the prison that I work in is actually what they would call restricted housing. So that means that I get to meet or supervise offenders from all over the state that have some small disciplinary infraction. I mean, certain things in a prison setting have a much more stronger issue with it, like something small as on the outside world where you smoke a cigarette. In a prison, that's a different kind of situation that could possibly put you in restricted housing. And I've seen Bloods and Crips and Aryan Nations, all of them kind of live within their own order. It's not like fight, and stab and all that other stuff. It's a different world to itself. In fact, when you speak to someone that's incarcerated, they'll even speak of the outside world as just that, like prison is a different world within itself, and it is. It's a lot of different rules, but the utmost thing of it in prison is mostly just respect. It's a respect factor. that we all carry. I'm respectful to them. They're respectful to me. And I'm not there to extend or to multiply their punishment. I'm just there to make sure that they follow the rules that are in place, which are very well laid out, and try to help them any way I can to better themselves while they're in there.
Because I know one of the things that has come up here, and it's mostly been activist groups, and I'm sure that you've heard about these complaints, is that sometimes when something happens, like somebody dies on the watch while they're in prison, then sometimes the prison itself seems to be more under a microscope than it might be if that had happened in regular society. I know there have been a couple of prisoners that have lost their lives, and now there's people that are wondering, did they get the right medical care? Did they get the right this? Did they get the right that? And I'm wondering, when you hear that kind of conversation from activists, because I'm sure you hear those conversations, because they're checking regularly. I know that there have been incidences in Durham. I'm sure there have been incidences in Orange County and other places. What is your reaction when you hear about these things that are going on? Like there might be somebody that is, supposedly being treated for something that we would consider minor or something that's not that big, and then their families find that this person has passed away or doesn't make it out of the system or passes, or, dies or whatever, and then there becomes a big community outrage about this. I was just wondering what your reaction has been when you've heard about these incidences, and do you think that they have any sort of legitimate complaint? Are we doing a good job of taking care of our inmates while they're in the system, I guess is what I'm really asking.
I think they're getting the best of care. I mean, most of them, for what we would, for a lot of the stuff that we would deal with from day to day, these guys, they go to the hospital, they go to UNC, they go to Duke, they go to several of our best hospitals in the state, as well as at Central Prison. It has a hospital, but it's not as though they're getting less medical care. They're getting some of the best medical care that any of us could get. So I kind of look at it and say I think it's more of a situation of those that don't know.
Right.
And that's part of what this reentry thing is about, because I can't really get upset with you for not knowing. I know it's a lot of people that say, well, you just got them in prison and you're not doing nothing for them and this and that. But it's a lot of great things that's happening that the state of North Carolina is doing towards trying to help these guys and get them to a place where they can re-enter society whole. We have family days.
Yeah. Because if it's my understanding, and Dean, it's my understanding, and Dean can answer this as well, because Dean, the person I do this show with, is actually out of the correction system as well. He works out of the correction system in the New Jersey area and everything. But I was just wondering, to both of you and everything, and we talked a little bit about this with Bessie. I think a lot of people do not necessarily understand what's going on with voting, because actually, it's my understanding that most prisoners actually now can vote, but that's just now becoming aware that people can do that. And then, like you said, these educational opportunities, that once they get in, I mean, we always hear about the people, like the historical people, like Malcolm X and other people that learned and were educated and self-educated themselves while they were in prison, because they were studying the libraries. They might have been studying the Bible. They might have been studying the Quran. They might have been studying different other books that they had access to in the library. But then it's my understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that actually there are programs that actually help prisoners even get into some of our, maybe, if not colleges, but I think they're allowed into the colleges, into the community colleges, where they're actually encouraging people to learn trades and to actually try to, if they don't have the correct training, maybe they only had a high school degree, maybe they don't even have a GED or things of that nature. They will actually help them try to get these. And some people, I mean, our lives happen at all times. So some people wind up going into the prison system after they've had college degrees. So maybe they don't want to go into that career or whatever, or maybe they want to get into another career. They might actually even help them find ways to get into both the academic, the more higher education kind of academics, whether that's getting a PhD, whether that's getting another bachelor's, whether that's getting a master's or whatever. So it's, from what I'm understanding, there are opportunities for people to further their education and also further their vocational opportunities, because that's one of the things that I know even in our school system, we don't necessarily do a good job of educating people in the vocational trade. So it seems to me that the prison system does do that.
Yeah, and I would think that with that being said, we could not have true reentry without providing opportunity for all of those things, like general a GED, or at our prison facility, we have a culinary school, we have a carpentry school. Other prisons, some prisons have HVAC schools. I mean, it's kind of like you can basically kind of grow as you wish, because a lot of those situations, like if they might have HVAC at a different prison, and if you really want to go to that class, it's a possibility that you could be asked to be transferred to that so that you have access to it. So it's not about the prison system isn't just about incarcerating people and keeping them locked up. And then hopefully when they get out, we've kind of helped them in whatever way that they are trying to, because it all begins with the person.
Right.
Indeed.
To excel.
And you're exactly right. Rehabilitation begins with the offender. And there are, even here in New Jersey, if they are under 21, it is a law that is their job to go to school, so that they can earn their high school diploma or their GED. We have the therapeutic programs that once they complete those, they can apply for a birth certificate paid for by the department. Once they have their birth certificate and Social Security cards, they can have their motor vehicle ID paid for by the department. So that and those programs that you speak of, the vocational programs, we offer those in different facilities. We have 13 here in New Jersey. Before I came to New Jersey, I worked in Virginia for 3 of the 7 years I was down there. I was the work rehabilitative coordinator at the jail in which I worked. So, having them go out into the community doing job site checks and, laying down the ground rules of the program and collecting the rent and calculating that versus the checks and all of those different things. I did that. That was one of the better parts of my 20 years so far. So to see them, obtain employment, and then once they left incarceration, they knew that those jobs belonged to them, not the jail. But then they moved on and moved up. And there was one guy, we had a jail contract bed program. Guys, 6 months to release, came back from the Virginia Department of Corrections to the regional jail to participate in work release. And there was one guy, he came in, he had probably about 10 cents to his name, got a job working at the warehouse, and he would always just take all the other guys' sandwiches and eat them because they didn't want them and stuff like that. He ended up staying about 12, 13 months. And in that 12, 13 months, he just saved all of his checks, and we had to cut a check for $10,000 for him. I had to go sign for the check for him to get it. And I was looking at him like, it can be done. A couple of years later, here he is working for Pet Foods, driving a truck, making way more money than he was working in the warehouse, delivering to the jail. So things can, the media sometimes, the media and hearsay fuel all of the misconceptions of what prison is. When someone sees rogue law enforcement doing something and treating someone in an improper manner, they put that all across the board. Not only is it just law enforcement, it's corrections, it's in the jails, it's everywhere. So people make mistakes. 1 second could change your life. But in most of our minds, we say, well, you're grown, you know the difference between right and wrong. And then some people turn their backs on those who've made a mistake, but they go to jail as for punishment. They go as a part of their punishment. They're not there to be punished while they are there.
Right.
So.
Right. That's very much true.
And I was just wondering for both of you, because that's something we hear about all the time, is people wondering about, and it seems like it's a very real thing, but both of you are working in the system. How much merit do you put into the whole concept of this, what they call the school-to-prison pipeline, where some of our males particularly, but it's females as well, are being maybe not as encouraged as they should be, and then they wind up getting caught up into the lifestyle that would land them in prison. Is this something that is just a media term, or is this something that you feel is a very real term, and we actually are seeing more of our kids that are getting caught up in, for lack of a better term, the gang mentality and the crime mentality, and some of how that's glamorized, and then they wind up being channeled into the prison system.